after lunch. Our distinguished guests have already come, and we will start with our first panel discussion. And we have very eminent guests on our panel. And really speaking, they don't need no introduction. But for all the ones who don't know, I would like to tell all of you viewers that our first very eminent and distinguished guest is Dr. Charan Singh, the former RBI Chair Professor of Economics, IIMB, and not to say the least that he is the non-executive chairman of Punjab and Sindh Bank. He is also a visiting scholar. He has been for more than a year at the Department of Economics, University, and the Stanford Center for International Development at Stanford University. That speaks volumes of his achievements, which by itself, all of you would know what he is. Then we have the second panelist, is none other than my senior, Rear Admiral Vineet Bakshi, retired. He has been a Vishesh Seva Medal, which is given to people who really know their job very well. And he has served in the Indian Navy and reached the topmost where it is not easy to reach. He's currently serving as the chairman and the managing director of Goa Shipyard, and he's a very efficient educationist himself. Then we have, Professor Dr. TMC Masamba. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correct, ma'am. And she's the Dean of the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Venda, South Africa. The last panelist, Dr. Asghar Ali, and he is presently, for some reason, for a little glitch, he's not with us, and he would be joining later. The discussion is basically again on mindfulness in various disciplines that our distinguished panelists belong to, and they would be discussing how their experiences, and they would be sharing their experiences and what they think about mindfulness in their disciplines. So I'll hand over now to our eminent guest, Dr. Charan Singh. Welcome you, sir. And if you could kindly take on from here and continue the discussion, ma'am.
Am I audible, please?
Sir, you are audible, sir. Absolutely audible.
So first of all, congratulations to all of you and Dr. Shai for having organized this excellent conference at this juncture of time. Absolutely required, very, very essential, and I must congratulate for even conceiving a conference of this size with the participants that you have brought in and the sessions that you have planned. It's an excellent organization and an excellent idea to have brought in at this point of time a conference of this shape and this color and vigor. I'm thankful to you for the introduction. I really think that the topic is very wide and very large. The scope is too wide. The issues are too critical. And bringing in a panel where we have the Rear Admiral, I think that's very, very important and helpful. And also we have then Professor Asghar Ali and Professor Mashama from the School of Health Sciences and HOD Psychology, Annamalai University. I'm sure they're going to join us. Asghar Ali is going to join us soon. In my opening remarks, I would simply like to say from the economist angle that the COVID situation has been very, very critical. And when I say critical, for some people, it has been a matter of life and death, that very critical. For others, and almost for the whole country, And I must correct myself, not for the whole country only, for the whole world, the economic situation in COVID turned out to be very, very difficult. There's hardly anybody who has not been impacted by the COVID. When you are economically impacted and financial strains appear, it is obvious that you are or anyone is going to be impacted psychologically. There is uncertainty, there is fear, and people who are in their self-employment, they have fear in terms of jobs, in profits, in earnings. People who have been in employment, there is fear of termination, not required, or heavy salary cuts. Basically, it's the survival which is at stake during this COVID period. This constant state of uncertainty, this constant fear of the unknown, where even life is not assured, even the employment is not assured, where profitability is not assured, where bread on the table is not assured, and then where you're not sure of your children getting a job, finding proper education, training, skills. Now, all this put together, you can imagine the uncertainty that it brings you to. In such a situation that one is, mindfulness is extremely important because the awareness that you as an individual, your race as a country or as a civilization must have faced these challenges many times over. As an economist, I knew that Spanish flu of 1918 had come in different waves, and each of these waves were more difficult than the previous ones. There was a first wave, but the first wave was X, the second wave was 5X, the third wave was 2X, and there was a fourth wave and the fifth wave before it finally went away. 100 years down the line, similar things happened. In Spanish flu, they had to come out with certain medicines. They took their time. In COVID, again, the same thing happened. But during this time, going by the past experience and learning that the civilization has survived for thousands of years and these episodes must have happened over and over again, one realizes that the most important thing in this critical time is the mindfulness. Even this will pass away. Even this will not be able to extinguish my spirit. And that is what I think takes the individual, the community, and the country forward. This is exactly what I saw happening in our country and across the planet. While advanced countries were able to provide lots of financial support to their citizens, in a poor country like India, it was not only the government that was able to provide whatever it could provide, it was individual support from each other, standing together, helping each other in times of critical needs. And these critical needs varied from simple food, where different NGOs, communities started the concept of distributing food, from simple food to providing certain essential household items, then taking care of education, then taking care of fee structure and ensuring that children don't come out of the school. But in all this, what was missing in the initial time was the mental health. Soon, 6 months later, even that became important, and people started adopting techniques, call it spiritual techniques, call it strengthening the mind techniques, call it the breathing techniques or yogic exercises. People adopted very quickly and realized this is not a 1 month phenomena, this is not a quarterly phenomena, this is going to last long. We were lucky, quote unquote, lucky in the sense that we were seeing it all play out in front of us in advanced countries. So, because of the connectivity, we knew that these are the sort of things that happen, and therefore we were getting mentally prepared. And of course, while we were getting mentally prepared, we were also being made aware that meditation helps. And many of us in our country adopted lots of meditative techniques, lots of yogic exercises to strengthen the body and the mind and become aware that even this will pass. This is exactly what has happened. Today is a very unique day. Today, we all know that we have crossed a 100 crore mark of vaccination. And this 100 crore mark of vaccination only proves that all of us stood together. Each individual, medical practitioner, or otherwise, has stood together for each other to take care that this difficult time we are able to handle peacefully and in a healthy pattern. That 100 crore landmark is basically a milestone in India working together. As you know, we all know that even in Western world, there's a reluctance. But in our country, crossing 100 crore out of a population of 130 is very important. Now, what does it indicate? It indicates that this civilization, which is 5,000 years old, understands the challenges to humanity, to very survival, adapts very quickly, adopts. These are different vaccines that are available, different practices that are available to strengthen your lungs and your immunity. Everything has been put into play and our mortality rate has been contained. And the economic progress is back on the track. And the world recognizes that in this year and next, we will be the fastest growing country on the planet. Our stock markets are robust and they are touching new heights every day. The monetary policy is on a very steady path and there is no panic. There is fear of unemployment, but that also is coming down and is under control. The banks are flushed with funds. They're waiting to give it to any entrepreneur. And you would have noticed the Startup India is doing wonders. And with the Startup India, we have unicorns come in and lift our spirits. So while the world is facing this crisis, the whole planet is under very difficult situation. The mindfulness of India, by its very practices, cultural practices, yogic practices, spiritual practices, that it is very varied, different colors, different hues, different ideologies, but each Indian practices this mindfulness and that is showing up in the last few months. And as we enter the festival season, and as I see wherever I go in this festival season, the crowded markets, the demand for goods and services, it only shows that the spiritual aspect that the Indians have been practicing for thousands of years is here to stay and has proved once again that this is the important aspect of survival instinct. With this, few observations, I would now like to invite the panelists to share their views. And in the sequence which has been mentioned, I think, by Dr. Chetan Sharda, I would now like to invite the Rear Admiral Vineet Bakshi to share his thoughts. And then we'll follow it up with Professor M.T Mulaudzi, and we'll wait for Professor Asghar Ali if he joins us in that much time. So with this, once again, thanks to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. And now let me invite Rear Admiral Vineet Bakshi, please.
Jai Hind, and greetings of the day to the distinguished panelists, viewers, Dr. Deepika Chamoli, Dr. Charan Singh, Mr. Chairman, sir, and Colonel Sharda. In the forenoon, we have heard some very eloquent speakers. Well, in this setting, the practices of the armed forces may seem to be a paradox, an oxymoron of sorts. Let me counterpoise those thoughts. The events and tangible factors of the recent past and the present have caused some sort of mental health problems and negatively affected every facet of mankind. The Indian Armed Forces are a well-knit and superbly organized institution. The extreme precautions taken, customs and traditions, conditioning, and early rollout of the vaccination have left them relatively unscathed. Mindfulness is one of the methods deployed by the armed forces to not only to mitigate stress, but also to achieve their objectives. It's not only about Khush Raho, but also Vijay Raho, be victorious. Mindfulness has various definitions, but to the lay person, it connotes a practice to bring about one's attention to the present moment, sans judgment, in order to mitigate stress. The armed forces, by the very nature of their profession, are called upon to devise, plan, train for, and execute violent acts, often leading to death and destruction on a horrendous scale. Whilst trying to preserve their own life and sanity, an expanded definition could therefore be a state of calm situational awareness caused by focusing of the mind to bring about concentrated attention developed by the build-up of individual knowledge through a system of rigorous training so as to enable coping with stress and achieve defined objectives. The armed forces of India comprise of the Indian Army, the Indian Navy, and the Indian Air Force. They are supported by the Indian Coast Guard, the Assam Rifles, and the Special Frontier Force. They have a strength of about 1.4 million active uniformed personnel, or say about 1 in every 1,000 Indians is in the armed forces. Often a question is posed, do we actually need such a powerful armed force? Well, in the short span of time since independence in 1947, India has fought 5 wars in defense of its territory and a number of conflicts, besides assisting the United Nations. In fact, in the last 3,000 years, there have been barely 300 years when mankind was at peace. War and conflict, it seems, is inherent in the very psyche of the human race. Without high-quality armed forces, India as a nation may well cease to exist. The armed forces are epitomized principally by their personnel. Let me therefore talk about 2 of them. Field Marshal Sam J. Manekshaw, Military Cross, and Honorary Captain Banna Singh, Paramveer Chakra. Field Marshal Manekshaw was known as Sam Bahadur. As a general, he was Chief of the Army Staff during the victorious Indo-Pakistan War of 1971, which liberated Bangladesh. An officer known for his calm temperament and being in the moment. Sometime in April 1971, during a cabinet meeting, the then Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi, desired that the armed forces attack East Pakistan forthwith. As nearly 10 million refugees had taken shelter in India due to the genocide and atrocities committed by the Pakistan Army, thus straining India's resources. Well, the general explained how ill prepared they were to the task and assured her that it was a distinct possibility that they may suffer a defeat if they were to so venture. No chief of the army staff will ever say so. At the end of the rather tumultuous meeting, the Prime Minister asked him, once all the cabinet ministers had left, if he was giving a true picture, and he said that it was his duty to do so and offered to resign. On his advice, the date was postponed, and as they say, the rest is history. Pakistan lost the war in 12 days, Bangladesh was liberated, and over 90,000 enemy troops surrendered. One of the greatest military victories in modern times. The general had at the right time displayed great situational awareness through a knowledge of the strength and weaknesses of our country, our armed forces, and those of the enemy. His characteristic trait was straight talk without rancor or being judgmental. An excellent example of mindfulness being the root of objective achievement. Honorary Captain Banna Singh, Paramveer Chakra. The then Naib Subedar Banna Singh of the 8th J&K Light Infantry was amongst the team chosen to capture Kaid Post at a height of 21,000 feet on Siachen Glacier in 1987. A near impregnable glacier fortress of ice walls, 15,000 feet high on either side, it had been occupied by Pakistan's Army's Special Forces. They had constructed bunkers and were using the vantage point for inflicting casualties on the Indian Army with sniper fire. Banna Singh and his team first went in search of the missing comrades. They found them, ambushed and massacred, lying dead in pools of blood, approximately 500 meters from the non-visible enemy lines. There was a near blizzard blowing, and the temperature was about minus 45 degrees centigrade. They returned to base camp, and after 2 failed attempts due to the inclement weather, made a 3rd attempt in equally foul conditions. They climbed the mountain in blizzard-like conditions, losing men en route in unseen crevices, ascended the ice cliffs and attacked the adversary. The bunkered enemy did not expect any person to be out in such severe weather, leave alone undertake an attack. Many were killed and injured in the operation, but they captured the post. It was astonishing, daring, and dramatic, and it was achieved under the indomitable drive of Banna Singh and his commander, Major Varinder Singh. The post was renamed as Banna Top in honor of the gallant soldier. What made the soldier and his teammates combat such extreme conditions? We return to mindfulness. It was the consciousness of fighting an aggressor and a just and moral cause. It was the strength of mind over matter brought about by the training and bonding. Lessons from the Mahabharata. The 2 incidents quoted are indicative of being mindful in conditions of extreme stress. In the Mahabharata, Arjuna was under stress and in a moral dilemma during battle. Lord Krishna, his charioteer, then guided him with the help of a narrative referred to as the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Whilst the lessons are many, I will mention 5. Firstly, uphold dharma. It is our duty to uphold dharma or eusebia, that what is appropriate and morally right. Secondly, focus on the relevant work as related to one's goals. Thirdly, remain in the present and accept the reality. Fourthly, keep the mind calm. And fifth, suffering is inherent in our lives. As Nanak used to say, Nanak Dukhiya Sab Sansar. mindfulness. The Indian Armed Forces draws many of its practices from those of various faiths of a nation. Mindfulness is one of them. In the practice of yoga, techniques such as pranayama, kapalbhati, and other breathing exercises, along with the practices of body asanas and dhyana, promote a development of mindfulness. On a lighter note, soldiers love good food, don't we all? Which in some way promotes their sense of well-being. It keeps them going in battle. This was harnessed in the setup of the Wolfmobile, which served fares such as hamburgers and similar feels like home, good food cuisine to the troops on the front line during Operation Desert Storm. It was the brainchild of Lieutenant General William Pagonis, the logistics chief of the US Armed Forces, and it ensured high morale of the US troops on the front line. I'll talk a little about combat stress. Combat stress, particularly in prolonged conditions, is a documented reality. It also afflicts us when we lose our comrades in battle, and sometimes even in peacetime to accidents and insurgent action. It's like losing a family member, a parent, a child, a wife. It was evocatively noted by war correspondent Philip Gibbs, who wrote, "Something was wrong. They put on civilian clothes again and looked to their mothers and wives, very much like the young men who had gone to business in the peaceful days before August 1914. But they had not come back the same men. Something had altered in them. They were subject to sudden moods and queer tempers, fits of profound depression, alternating with a restless desire for pleasure. Many were easily moved to passion, where they lost control of themselves. Many were bitter in their speech, violent in opinion, frightening. Consequently, stress exposure training has now evolved and become intrinsic in military training, and the practice of mindfulness through various techniques assists in rehabilitation of a soldier. In conclusion, the Indian Armed Forces have been called upon to protect the territorial integrity of our country in 5 wars since independence, besides a number of conflicts and confrontations. Future conflicts are a distinct possibility and an ever-present danger. It's personal through the development of mindfulness as part of the fundamental training practices, prepare for the worst case scenarios to ensure that they cope with the stressful situations and achieve their goals. Shanu Varanaha, Jai Hind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rear Admiral. That was amazing, the story that you narrated, connecting with the Bhagavad Gita. That was so wonderful. Thank you very much. Now let's move on to our next panelist. Professor Asghar Ali Patel, I understand, has joined. Professor is HOD Psychology, Annamalai University. Professor, would you be ready to go next? Professor? Professor Patel, are you ready to go next? I understand you have joined. Okay, maybe there is some technical glitch. Can I then invite Professor M.T Mashama, Dean, School of Health Sciences? Professor Mashama, are you available? Yes, there we see you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Program Director, and thank you for the opportunity. If you will allow me, I've just turned on my video so that you can see me, and so that you can also match the name to the face. I'm going to present my paper. So if you allow me, I'll switch off my video. As long as you have seen me now, you know who is talking. Thank you very much. I'm going to be looking at the relationship between mindfulness and mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic. And my presentation will focus on this relationship. And also I will look at, you know, the gender-based violence as to how it impacts the mental health, and also how mindfulness play a role in reducing some of the psychological symptoms that are brought by gender-based violence and COVID-19. Although, you know, the concept of mindfulness has its origins in the East and in many contemplative and philosophical traditions such as Hinduism and Buddhism, its practice does not necessarily imply following a specific philosophy or religion. However, our generation of youth and middle-aged people have become more inclined to mental health care and putting more effort in increasing positive mental health. What has inevitably become popular is the idea of self-care and positive psychology and self-empowerment pursuit for mental health. This means that with social influence, group influence, and active pursuit of positive mental health, this generation has become more inclined to mindfulness than in the past. And from a clinical perspective, the origin concept of mindfulness has been used through standardized interventions with the intention of obtaining improvement in determined outcomes for physical and mental health. Mindfulness is also a double component for psychological processes that include paying attention to present moment experience and possessing an attitude of openness, non-reactivity, and acceptance. Therefore, in this presentation, mindfulness will be defined as a state of being attentive to and aware of what is taking place in the present. While a large number of studies focus on the association between mindfulness and negative psychological outcomes, such as depression and anxiety, a comparatively small but growing number of studies have shown that mindfulness influences or is associated with various aspects of psychological well-being and positive mental health. For instance, mindfulness scores have been shown to be highly and positively correlated with positive effect, as well as a superior level of self-esteem, resilience, hope, and life satisfaction. That suggests that mindfulness might play an important role in supporting physical and psychological well-being. However, although these findings at some points might not be consistently replicated, some studies, for example, have found that trait mindfulness failed to contribute unique variants in the prediction of life satisfaction. But all in all, most studies support each other in indicating that mindfulness disposition is associated with various psychological factors and prevents emotional distress in chronic diseases. When we look at our mental health, we find that mental disorders are a leading cause of disability with an extensive socioeconomic consequences. We have conditions such as major depressive and anxiety disorders that have a considerable impact on large portions of the population. Now, although we have so many causes that would cause stress and depression, I have, for the purpose of this presentation, picked up two issues that I would want us to talk about, which are COVID-19 and gender-based violence. And these are two issues are a public health concern, and they occur across all populations, regardless of their social economic status, religious background, cultural factors, geographical location. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has given rise to fear concerning the disease health risks for oneself and the loved ones and its long-term economic consequences. When the COVID-19 emerged, it brought many changes on the way we do things, but at the same time, we find that there are good practices that we have learned from each other. And during the rapid high rate of the infections, government brought some restrictions in order to curb the spread of the disease. One of the restrictions was the lockdown alert levels, starting from 1 to 5, in which with the level 5, most of the people had to stay and work from home. Then we also have, some advantages of the COVID-19 because, most of the institutions had saved a lot of money on traveling, on rental of office space, electricity and water, and so forth. And we also have learned to be innovative because we do hold our meetings, conferences, funerals, wedding, and events remotely. For example, even this conference, in the past, we would have to travel to India in order to attend this conference. But because of COVID-19, we became very innovative to say we can attend, we can meet with colleagues from different parts of the world, from the comfort of our own homes or our offices. So with those advantages, we are also able to connect with our families and friends, just to chat with them, even though they are in other parts of the world. And some people have now begun to appreciate the personalities of family members, because in the past, there was no interaction or very little interaction with families who stay far or who stay in other continents. But because of the technology now, we are able to connect with them from time to time. But then we also have, disadvantages that COVID-19 has brought, because during the alert level 5 and 4, we couldn't visit our friends and relatives, and we couldn't visit those who were sick, those who were in the hospitals. We couldn't even, engage in the processes of burying our loved ones, our families, and so forth. So, excuse me for that. So it has been very difficult, and we also find that some of our colleagues have lost their jobs, they have lost their salaries, other salaries were reduced, and and it has been a very difficult situation. Some people were even unable to recover from the situation. And we also have some people who used to enjoy traveling during holidays and had their holidays together as families, but that had to stop because of the restrictions on COVID-19. So while other people began to appreciate, having to stay with families when they had to work from home, others became bored and irritated because they were not used to spending long hours with family members. And lockdown is not and cannot be only the cause of COVID-19, but there are also other circumstances that have the ability to keep people on lockdown. For example, if a person is on wheelchair bound, or has got some ill health, or they have got financial challenges. So lockdown has effect on us emotionally, spiritually, physically, financially, and to sum it up, it affects all spheres of life, and it has caused a lot of stress. So we can now turn on into the gender-based violence, which we find that it touches on every sphere of life also, requiring multifaceted responses and commitment from all stakeholders, including government, civil society, and other citizens. The prevalence of gender-based violence is that, we have been unable to get accurate statistics in South Africa because of many reasons. One of the reasons is that most incidences of gender-based violence are not reported. But the 2009 South African National Femicide Study found that 1,024 females were murdered by an intimate partner, and a further 768 females were killed by a non-partner. An intimate femicide is therefore the leading cause of female murder, representing more than half, which is 56% of all women that have been killed. And the same study found that rape, femicide was identified in every 1 in 5 women killed, which is 19.8%. The causes of this is that, the patriarchal power structures that dominate in many societies, in which male leadership is seen as the norm and men hold majority of power. And also, patriarchy is a social and political system that treats men as superior to women, and men also want to be given complete respect, even when their behavior does not warrant that. Therefore, we can conclude that in all forms of violence against women and children, they stem from unequal power relations between men and women. But we do have similarities between the two, COVID-19 and gender-based violence, because both of them are illnesses which needs treatment, support, and prevention. Both of them can be contracted by anyone. They have no respect for person's position in the community, race, socioeconomic status. And in their extremes, both can result in death. So both of them need some intervention. Then we have the psychological impact of gender-based violence, which is that it interferes with daily activities and includes behavioral problems. And then we have mild, where we find a person would display anger outbursts, low self-esteem, impulsiveness, irritability, and concentration difficulty. And at moderate stage, we have anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse, and forgetfulness. And in severe depression, that's where we have, in its severe state, we have depression, mood disorders, hallucinations, suicide ideation, and suicide attempt, and finally suicide. And in South Africa, every August we do celebrate Women's Month, where we pay tribute to more than 20,000 women who marched to the union buildings on the 9th of August. And in protest against the extension of pass-off laws to women, this system was meant to control women even further and to reduce women to passive beings at the mercy of men. The international campaign of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence to challenge violence against women and children ran every year from 25th November to 10 December. People are encouraged not to be involved in violent activities, and it denounces cultural practices that perpetuate gender inequalities and support for victims of gender-based violence. But surprisingly, it is during this period that we see the highest prevalence of gender-based violence and femicide. So mindful practices under lockdown conditions during COVID-19 pandemic might be associated with a change in mental health. Increased mindfulness practices during the COVID-19 pandemic will also be associated with positive changes in symptoms of pandemic-related distress, depression, anxiety, and stress, and socio-demographic characteristics, and lockdown duration would negatively affect psychological well-being. Several studies indicate that mindfulness and socio-demographic characteristics play a key role in moderating the experience of COVID-19 related distress, and mindfulness also dispositions and practice, as with other psychological resources, enhance the adaptation that leads to better adjustment to stress. In order to stem the psychological consequences lying ahead in the future due to traumatic nature of the recent pandemic, we therefore suggest paying accurate attention to mindfulness disposition and training. In conclusion, there are different mindfulness-based interventions which have proven to reduce mental disorders, including PTSD symptoms, depression, anxiety, and anxiety in women victims of gender-based violence. And as psychologists, we have the responsibility to save lives through using different interventions that have proven to be effective. And mindfulness-based interventions are some of those interventions that have been proven to be effective. And I would like to encourage our colleagues to consider using some of these interventions. Finally, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the conference organizers for participation and to share ideas and to allow me to share my ideas on mindfulness. And I wish all the participants well as we continue with this conference. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. This was very profound, also very well thought through, and covered various areas. Really thankful to you for bringing in such an important issue of the suffering of the females during this phase. We have been thinking about this at eGrow Foundation at length. We have been also thinking that in India, the children caught up in small houses, not able to go to schools, what would be the state of their mental health, and how do we, the elders of course, meditate, but how would the children handle that situation? The migrant laborers who went back and were not confident of returning to the city, and the ones who did return to the city after the first wave, and the second wave hit, and again went back or went into a shell. What do we do for that segment of the population which has to search for jobs outside their homes, sometimes 1,000 miles away? And that's another challenge that was faced. The biggest challenge that I think the COVID provided was the situation of a feeling of worthlessness. The situation of feeling of worthlessness was really painful. Why? Because the self-esteem and the helplessness have been impacted severely. The only way, to me, and some of us who were discussing this, was practicing spirituality, connecting with the super power, connecting with the Almighty, looking at the situation through which we Indians have passed through at different points of time in history, some in recent history. The difficulties that a poor country like India has, the resilience of staying without a meal or staying without a nutritious meal, provided the strength to many. Some even went on an empty stomach before the government could provide them resources and free rations. Some had to travel on foot. Total sense of worthlessness. And despite this worthlessness that the Indians faced, the feeling of resilient, because many in the past have passed through this, and I think that is where the role which Rear Admiral brought in of the longest epics in human history, Ramayana and Mahabharata, brought in so much of strength to individuals in our country. The Gita, which also helped that situation of mindfulness. So I think while many things played a role across the planet for the survival instinct of the human race, in India, we were blessed because of our long history of civilization, as well as our passing through difficult phases regularly. Also, I believe that the food habits that Indians have, the food which is full of natural ingredients and herbs, which proved to the world during COVID that they improve immunity, had helped the Indians build natural immunity. The breathing exercises that we Indians practice through different yogic postures, as well as without yogic postures, breathing, deep breathing, meditation has helped the Indians in surviving this critical time of COVID. As the history of COVID would be written by the world, a poor country like India with very less mortality rate and a poor country like India could rise to the occasion to produce different vaccines, not only within their country, but this is where I bring another aspect of mindfulness, that you distribute it to the rest of the world. While you are suffering, you make sure that to some extent, you're able to give the vaccine to the rest of the world to minimize suffering elsewhere. This spirit that the Indians demonstrated during this COVID, I would think is unparalleled. And I would congratulate the government in power who took that bold step despite being aware that they will be severely criticized for exports during these difficult times. The practice of mindfulness that happened in our country and the survival that happened post the second wave, and now I do not know if the third wave is over. As I mentioned in my introductory remarks, is so apparent in exuberance and optimism that one sees with the festival season. We have just completed Ganesh Chaturthi, which opens the festival season. We have also just completed Dasara and 9 days of celebration and meditating on the female energy, something which Professor Mashima was explaining at length, the challenges that the females faced. But these 9 days, we in India celebrate the female energy. And I would like to mention one thing, and I seek forgiveness if it is my hypothesis, because the women in India are celebrated in such a big way, and their energy is celebrated every year. If the lady of the house is strong mentally, she is able to keep the family strong. And believe me, in the last 16 months that I have interacted, I have always found the women very, very strong. And I give that credit to 9 days of celebration that we do to Durga, which brings in various strengths of the women in our country. So these are the aspects which we need to sit and analyze. Sociologists, psychologists, and the economists. There's a long, long research agenda which we all need to pursue. I would now like to conclude. We have only 5 minutes more left for the next session to start. I would now like to conclude by thanking the organizers, by thanking the two panelists, and once again congratulating the organizers for conceiving such an important topic and organizing it in such a beautiful way over 3 days. With that, I hand over the mic back to the organizers, thanking them for giving me an opportunity to chair a session in this important conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was an absolute pleasure to have such eminent uh, personalities discussing. Dr. Charan, it was absolutely an eye-opener of what you said. Admiral Bakshi, he's always a pleasure to listen to with his stable and very logical words. And absolutely, and it was an absolute eye-opener regarding the different aspects that we don't think of in India. But let me say, as a physician who has worked within these past year amongst the first wave and the second wave patients, I started very cynically because of I thought the humanity was faulting at large during the first wave when everybody was very, very, very selfish. But what I saw in the second wave in India, I saw hope for humanity, the way the community came together when the administration was very stretched. But the community, everybody in the community, we have too many fault lines in the community, but those fault lines were blurred. And I am talking about the heartland of India, like in the villages and in small towns where I'm presently serving in Bhavani Mandi. This is a small township, a well-known township, yet it's almost the heartland of Rajasthan. But here I saw hope for humanity. And I saw how people coped up and the smiles on their faces when it came back. Despite all the problems that they have today, they can still smile. It talks volumes of what our ancestors have left for us and what they have given to us and what we need to further. And we need to further it. Obviously, in this moment, we talk about mindfulness, but there, all the civilizations will have their mechanisms, all the intellectualism that they have, they will be able to survive. And that is what being human is all about. We survive and we do well. That is what we do. And I hope that is what we continue to do and give what we have to give to our coming generations. Thank you so much, everyone. And before I sign off this particular session, I hereby also want to reiterate that we at Speaking Cube are ready for any humanity-related projects that will come our way or that will, all our viewers are ready to share with us. So with that, I will request Deepika to continue if she can.
Thank you so much, Charan sir. Thank you so much, Dr. Mashamba and Vineet sir, for your words of wisdom. It was a pleasure to have this panel discussion. And thank you so much, Chetan sir, for being the advisor of Speaking Cube. Thank you so much, audience, for your patient listening. And it was a mind-blowing panel discussion. And probably you all have enjoyed it a lot. So with this, we would like to conclude and have a nice day, everyone. So we'll see you tomorrow and day after. Thank you, everyone.